I want to start today with something that's, honestly, it's a little uncomfortable. I'm going to read you a quote, and I don't want you to just hear it. I want you to really sit with it for a second, because when I first opened the file we're looking at today, this quote just stopped me cold.
I have a feeling I know exactly which one you're looking at. It's right near the beginning.
It is. It's from Jeremy Richmond. He was the father of Aviel Richmond, who was one of the first graders killed at Sandy Hook. He gave this testimony to the commission we're discussing today, and he was talking about the condolences he and his wife received. He said, "We would often hear people say, 'I can't imagine what you're going through. I can't imagine how hard it must be. I can't imagine losing your child.'"
Which is the default, right? It's what we all say when we don't know what to say. It's meant to be kind, to show support without being intrusive.
Exactly. It's almost a polite shield. But then he pivots, and this is the part that, it really hurts, he says. "And while we appreciated the sentiment, the fact was that they were imagining it. They were putting themselves into our shoes for at least a second. And as hard and as horrible as it sounds, we need people to imagine what it is like. Without that imagination, we'll never change."
That is just a profoundly difficult and profoundly necessary place to start. It's a demand, really. It demands that we move from sympathy, which is easy, and it's passive, to real empathy, which is active work, and it's painful.
It is work. He's challenging us to actually do that work, to look at the horror directly, not to wallow in it, but because if we don't truly imagine how the system failed, how every crack lined up on that one day, we can't possibly fix them.
And that really is the entire mission of the document we're looking at today.
It really is. And that brings us to our deep dive. We are looking at the final report of the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission.
This is a huge document. It was presented to the governor of Connecticut, Daniel Malloy, back in March of 2015, so, a couple of years after the event.
And look, we all know the context. We know this report stems from the tragedy on December 14, 2012 at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. But I think there's a tendency to look at a big government report like this and just think it's, paperwork, a doorstop, something that gets filed away.
And that would be a massive mistake. This wasn't a standard bureaucratic exercise. The commission wasn't just tasked with a crime scene investigation. They weren't just asking what happened or who did it. We knew those answers. Tragically, very quickly, their mission was entirely forward-looking.
Right. The mission statement was basically, how do we stop this from ever happening again? And the scope is just staggering. I went into this expecting a lot of talk about gun laws, and sure, that's in there, a lot. But it also covers safe school design, architecture, police response tactics, mental health insurance billing, landscaping.
It's everything. And the commission actually uses a specific word to describe their recommendations. They call it a tapestry. I think that word choice is deliberate and really important for us to keep in mind throughout this whole discussion.
Why tapestry? Why not just a plan or a checklist?
Well, think about a checklist. A checklist implies that if you do 3 out of 5 things, you're, 60% safe. You can pick and choose. A tapestry, on the other hand, implies that everything is interwoven. If you pull one thread, say, you focus entirely on hardening the school doors with steel, but you completely ignore the mental health system. The whole thing unravels. You haven't actually created safety. You've just moved the risk around. You need all these disparate elements, law enforcement, school design, and mental health working together to create a net that can actually catch people.
So let's start to unpack this tapestry. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the locks and the laws, there was this one concept right at the beginning of the report that really surprised me. It felt kind of counterintuitive. They call it the all hazards philosophy.
Yes, this is absolutely foundational. If you don't understand the all hazards approach, none of the other recommendations really make sense in context. It's the philosophy of modern emergency management, really.
Okay, so walk me through it. Because my first instinct, and I think the instinct of any parent listening right now, is to say, I don't care about all hazards. I care about the hazard, the shooter. If I'm a principal, why shouldn't I just turn the school into a fortress, bolt the doors, bar the windows, build a concrete bunker?
And that is the natural emotional response. It's completely understandable. But the commission realized early on that if you design a school specifically and only to stop an active shooter, you might accidentally create a death trap for other much more common emergencies.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about a fire. A fire is statistically way more likely to happen in a school than a shooting, or a chemical spill in a science lab, or a natural disaster like a tornado or an earthquake, depending on where you live.
Right.
Now, if you've turned that school into a gated community or a prison where every exit is barred and chained to keep bad guys out, How do you get 500 children out during a fire?
You can't. You've trapped them inside.
Exactly. You've traded one very specific, very rare risk for another, a much more probable risk. The all hazards approach means that every recommendation has to be weighed against the full spectrum of risk. The goal isn't to build a bunker that can withstand a siege but fails during a medical emergency. It's about building safer schools that remain welcoming, functional places for education, while mitigating all types of threats.
So it's a balancing act. You have
Yes.
to secure the facility, but you can't compromise the ability to evacuate. Or, I guess, for EMTs to get in if a kid has an asthma attack.
Correct. And that brings up the core tension of this whole deep dive, really. It's the question the commission wrestled with on every page. How do you secure a school without turning it into a prison? Because the moment a school starts to feel like a prison, they argue, you are actually damaging the educational experience and the psychological development of the children inside, which in the long run creates its own set of problems.
So to understand the solutions they came up with, the specific recommendations about locks and glass and police tactics, we have to look at the event itself. We have to understand the why behind the what. And I have to warn you, our listeners, we are going to talk about the timeline of that morning. It is heavy. It's uncomfortable. But the report is very, very factual about this, and for a very good reason.
We have to look at the clock. The commission found that you cannot possibly fix the problem if you don't understand what they called the calculus of time.
So let's walk through the morning of December 14, 2012. The report lays it out clinically, minute by minute. The shooter arrived at the school shortly before 9:30 a.m. And he didn't exactly sneak in, did he?
No, and this is important. It dispels a common myth about how these things happen. He didn't pick a lock. He didn't find an open side door. He didn't trick a janitor. The front doors of Sandy Hook Elementary were locked. They were secure. The school was following its standard protocol.
So the lock on the door did its job, mechanically speaking.
The lock worked perfectly, but the shooter bypassed the lock entirely by attacking the building envelope itself. He used a Bushmaster Model XM15 E2S rifle to shoot out a large plate glass window right next to the locked front doors.
I want to pause on the weapon for just a second because the report is very specific about exactly what he had on him. He had that Bushmaster rifle, he had 2 handguns, a Sig Sauer, and a Glock. And he had hundreds of rounds of ammunition on his person in multiple magazines.
And a shotgun was left in the car. He came prepared for a prolonged engagement.
Right. So he shoots out the window, and he literally just steps through the hole he made in the glass into the school's lobby.
Yes. Now, start the clock. The first 911 call hits the Newtown Police Department at 9:35 and 39 seconds in the morning.
Okay, 9.35.39.
The first Newtown police officers arrived in the school driveway less than 4 minutes later. They were on site at the building in under 4 minutes. They entered the building shortly after that. And by 9:40 a.m., the shooter had taken his own life.
Wait, pause there. That's incredibly fast.
It's minutes. The entire event from the first 911 call to the final gunshot was less than 5 minutes.
I think when we see these things on the news or we watch movies, we imagine a standoff. We imagine SWAT teams negotiating for hours, a perimeter being set up. This was over before most of the first responders even started their engines.
From his entry into the building to the end of the event, it was less than 10 minutes. And that leads to the commission's most chilling but most practical insight. They stated explicitly in the report, seconds and minutes equate to lives lost or saved.
It's a math problem,
Yeah.
a brutal math problem.
It is, and every single recommendation you'll find in this report regarding hardware, glass, locks, and police response is built around that specific timeline. The goal isn't necessarily to stop the shooter at the perimeter, though that would be ideal. The primary achievable goal is to buy time. If you know the police will take 4 minutes to arrive, the building has to survive for 4 minutes and 1 second.
And the report notes the sheer volume of fire during those few minutes.
Yeah.
This part was hard to read. They found 154 spent casings from the rifle alone inside that school.
Correct. 154 rifle rounds in roughly 4 minutes of shooting. That is a staggering amount of lethality. It's almost hard to comprehend that rate of fire.
How's that even mechanically possible? I mean, you have to reload, right?
And this brings us to the lethality analysis the commission performed. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. The shooter used high-capacity, 30-round magazines. But not just that. He had taped 2 of these magazines together, side by side, but inverted.
Jungle style, I think it's called.
That's the term. It's a military technique. You fire 30 rounds, you hit the magazine release, the empty one falls out, you just flip the whole thing over, and you slam the fresh 30-round magazine in. You're reloading in under a second.
So there's almost no pause.
Almost zero pause. The commission argues that this specific mechanical advantage, the ability to maintain a continuous high-volume stream of fire without pausing, directly correlated to the number of lives lost.
Because every time a shooter has to stop and reload a standard magazine, that's a pause. That's a second where a teacher can lock a door, or a child can run for cover, or a police officer can advance down the hall.
Exactly. It's friction. It's an interruption in the violence. If you force the shooter to stop and fumble with a new magazine from a pouch every 10 rounds, you've created multiple distinct pauses. Those are opportunities for survival. The taped, high-capacity magazines effectively eliminated those opportunities for the victims.
So keeping that seconds count mantra in our minds, let's pivot to Section 2 of the report. Safe School Design and Operation, or SSDO, as they call it. This is where the report gets really architectural. And again, they're wrestling with that central tension. We want safety, but we don't want to raise our children in a bunker.
And they explicitly reject the idea of gated communities or prison-like environments for schools. They argue that if a school looks and feels like a prison, it fosters a culture of fear. And a culture of fear is actually counterproductive to learning and healthy development.
So they use this term, invisible security, which sounds a bit like a spy movie, but it's actually a really practical and, I think, elegant concept.
It's about designing safety features that you don't necessarily notice as security. It's baked into the environment, and it starts at the very edge of the property line. The report leans heavily on a concept called CPTED.
CPTED, okay, that's an acronym. Let's unpack that.
It stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. It's a whole field of study. The basic idea is that the physical environment can be designed to influence human behavior in a way that deters crime.
Okay, so if I drive past a school that was designed using CPT principles, what am I seeing? Or maybe, what am I not seeing?
Well, you're not seeing a 12-foot chain link fence with razor wire on top. What you are seeing is thoughtful landscaping. You're seeing what's called natural surveillance.
Natural surveillance, what is that?
It's the idea that you design the parking lots, the walkways, the main entrance, and the playgrounds so that they are naturally observable by the people inside the building. You want clear, unobstructed sightlines.
So no big, dense bushes right up against the windows where someone could hide.
Exactly. And you don't put a playground behind a solid brick wall where nobody in the main office can see if a stranger walks up to the kids. You put that playground in a place that's visible from the administrative windows, from the library, from classrooms. You create a situation where you have dozens of pairs of eyes on it just by happenstance throughout the day.
So instead of a concrete wall, maybe you have a lower decorative fence you can see through.
Right.
Or you trim the tree canopy up high so you can see clearly under the branches.
Precisely. To a parent, it just looks like nice gardening and a well-maintained property. To a security expert, it's a strategic design choice. The report also gets very specific about distance. For example, they recommend that playgrounds should be located at least 50 feet back from public access points or parking areas, if at all possible.
Just to create a buffer zone, a reaction gap.
Right. And they talk about using things like bollards or large, heavy planters to prevent vehicles from being able to drive right up to the front door at high speed.
I've seen those, the big concrete flower pots or spheres outside of government buildings.
Exactly. To a visitor, it just looks like a nice landscaped entrance with some flowers. To a security expert, it's a vehicle barrier that prevents a car from being used as a battering ram, or, in a worst-case scenario, delivering a bomb. That is the essence of invisible security.
But then we get to the building itself, the building envelope, as they call it. And this goes right back to what happened at Sandy Hook. Because, as we established, the lock on the front door didn't fail. The glass failed.
This is a major, major focus of the report. Most schools, historically, use standard tempered glass. You know, think of a sliding patio door in your house. If you shoot it or hit it hard enough with a hammer, what happens?
It shatters into a million little cubes and falls out.
Instantly. It just disintegrates. It offers zero resistance to entry. It's gone. So the commission recommends that all schools upgrade to forced entry-resistant glazing.
Is that the same thing as bulletproof glass?
Not necessarily, and that's a key distinction. True bullet-resistant glass is incredibly heavy, incredibly thick, and prohibitively expensive for most school districts. The goal here, again, isn't to make the school invincible, it's to buy time.
Right. Back to the clock.
Exactly. They talk about things like laminated glass. Think of your car's windshield.
Okay, so if a rock hits my windshield on the highway, it cracks. It spiderwebs all over. But it doesn't fall into my lap. It stays in the frame.
Exactly, because there is a layer of plastic, a polymer, sandwiched between the layers of glass. It holds it all together. The Commission suggests a standard where the glass, in critical areas, like around doorways, should be able to withstand a determined forced entry for a specific amount of time. They suggest a 5-minute forced entry standard as a goal.
Okay, let's do the math on that right now. If the glass takes 5 minutes to beat through,
and we know the police can arrive in 4 minutes.
you've bridged the gap. You've won the race.
Precisely. If the shooter shoots the window, it cracks and turns opaque, but it stays in the frame. Now he has to physically beat it out. He has to use the butt of the rifle or a hammer or kick it repeatedly. That takes energy, it makes a lot of noise, which alerts people inside, and most importantly, it burns the clock. Every second he spends fighting the window is a second a teacher can lock a door.
It's fascinating. It's not about stopping the bullet. It's about frustrating the shooter and slowing him down.
Correct. They also recommend, as part of that building envelope, a vestibule system, a double door, or what some people call an airlock entry.
I've seen these in newer schools. You walk in the first set of doors from the outside, and you're trapped in a little glass lobby. You can't get into the main school hallway until someone in the office sees you and buzzes you through the second set of doors.
Right. It forces every visitor to pass through a screening area. It prevents someone from just tailgating a student who's walking into the main hallway. It's a simple but very effective physical choke point.
Okay, so we've hardened the outside in the entrance. Now let's move inside the building, into the classroom. And this, to me, this was the most striking and, frankly, hopeful finding in the whole design section. The door lock rule.
It is the single most critical, low-tech, and life-saving finding in the report. The Commission stated it very clearly. There has never been an event up to the time of the report's publication where an active shooter breached a locked and occupied classroom door.
Never. Not once.
Essentially never. In all the data they reviewed, active shooters do not spend time picking locks or trying to kick down solid wood or metal doors. They are racing the clock. They are looking for easy targets. They try the handle. If it's locked, they move on to the next one. They are hunting for targets of opportunity, not trying to solve an engineering problem.
That is, wow. I mean, that simplifies things so much, doesn't it? The answer is just lock the door.
It sounds so simple, but the logistics of how you lock the door matter immensely. And this detail, when I read it, it honestly made me angry. I want you to think about the classrooms you grew up in. If the teacher heard a commotion and needed to lock the door, what did they have to do?
Oh, man. They had to find the key, which was usually on a big jangly keychain.
Yeah.
Go to the door, open the door, step out into the hallway, put the key in the outside lock, turn it, take the key out, and then quickly get back inside and pull the door shut.
Exactly. So in the middle of an active shooter event, the standard procedure in most older schools requires the teacher to open the door and step into the line of fire to secure the room.
That's absolute insanity.
The Commission thought so too. Their recommendation is absolute and unequivocal. All classroom doors must be lockable from the inside without a key. A teacher should never, ever have to breach the safety of the room to engage the lock. It should be a simple thumb turn or a button. One action from the safe side of the door.
It seems like such a small hardware change, but it's literally the difference between life and death.
It is. They also mentioned a design feature for new schools called tailgating prevention between classrooms.
What does that mean in this context?
So many modern schools have doors that connect classrooms directly to each other, like Room 101 connects to Room 102 internally without going into the main hall. The report encourages this. It allows for internal movement and evacuation. If a shooter is in the hallway, a teacher in one room can move their students through the connecting door into the next room and so on, moving them further away from the threat without ever entering the dangerous corridor.
It creates a maze for the shooter, but an escape route for the staff and students. There was one other detail in this design section that just seemed so small but so incredibly smart: the numbering system.
Yes. This is all about situational awareness for first responders. The recommendation is to number all exterior windows and doors. Large reflective numbers, maybe in the upper right corner of every single window.
Explain why that's so critical.
Okay, imagine you are a police officer. You're the first one to arrive at this massive, sprawling brick school building. You've never been inside it before in your life. The dispatcher gets on the radio and says, a teacher is on the phone. She says the intruder is in Mrs. Smith's third grade classroom.
You have absolutely no idea where that is. It could be anywhere.
Zero idea. Is it on the first floor? The north wing. But imagine the dispatcher says the teacher is hiding under her desk and she can see the number 12 on the window. And you, the officer outside, you just look up at the building and you see the big reflective number 12 on a window on the second floor.
You know exactly where the threat is.
You know exactly where to go. It allows the people hiding inside to coordinate with the tactical teams outside. It cuts through the fog of war and saves precious, precious time.
Now, implementing all this, you can't just hand a blueprint to a principal and walk away. This stuff needs maintenance. The report talks about creating local champions.
This is all about the human element of security. Security isn't a one-time purchase. It's a constant process. Locks break, glazing gets cracked by a stray baseball, new staff forget procedures. The report recommends a standing school security and safety committee in every single district. And interestingly, they get very specific about who should be on it. Of course, you have the police chief, the fire chief, the principal, and the custodians.
I loved that detail. Why the custodians?
Think about it. Who knows the physical building better than anyone else? Who knows which side door jams when it gets humid? Who knows that the latch on the boiler room window has been loose for 6 months?
The guy with the keys.
The head custodian. They are the eyes and ears of the physical plant. The commission recognized that leaving them out of security planning is a massive, critical oversight. You can have the best policies in the world, but if the side door doesn't actually latch properly because the frame is rusted, you have no security. The custodian knows about the rust. They have to be at the table.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's shift gears. This is a big one. We built a safer school building. Now we have to talk about the weapons themselves. Section 3. Law enforcement, weapons, and public safety. This is where the report navigates some very, very tricky political and constitutional waters.
It absolutely does, and the report is very upfront about the legal landscape. They begin the section by citing District of Columbia v. Heller, which is the landmark Supreme Court case. They acknowledge that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to bear arms for purposes like self-defense.
So they aren't coming into this saying, confiscate all guns. That's not the starting point.
Not at all. They acknowledge there are some 300 million firearms in civilian hands in the U.S. Their focus isn't on a total ban, but on two very specific concepts: lethality and suitability.
We touched on lethality with the taped magazines, but let's go deeper into the recommendations. The Commission recommended a total ban on the sale and possession of any ammunition magazine capable of holding more than 10 rounds.
Right, and the argument here is purely about the mechanics of mass casualty events. It's a time and math problem again. If you limit the magazine to 10 rounds, you force a reload every 10 shots. As we already discussed, that creates pauses. It reduces the volume of fire a single individual can produce in a short amount of time.
Now, the immediate counter-argument you always hear is about sport. I need this for the range, or I use this for competition shooting.
The Commission addressed that argument head-on. They essentially argued that sportsmanship does not require military-grade magazines. If you are target shooting or hunting, the necessity for a 30-round magazine simply doesn't outweigh the immense public safety risk they pose when used in a crime. They essentially drew a line and said, the convenience of the hobbyist in this specific case does not override the safety of the public.
There was also a recommendation in this section that felt very CSI, or almost futuristic, the idea of laser etching.
Yes, this is a very interesting technological recommendation. They suggested a law that would require every single shell casing sold in the state of Connecticut to have a unique serial number laser etched onto it.
Every single bullet casing.
Every single one. The reasoning is twofold. First, and most obviously, it aids in solving crimes. If you find spent casing at a crime scene, you can trace that casing back to the exact box of ammunition it came from, and thus to the exact person who bought it.
It's like a tiny license plate for every bullet.
That's a great way to put it. But the second, and maybe more important reason, is to prevent straw purchases of ammunition.
That's when I, a legal buyer, go and buy ammo for someone else who isn't legally allowed to have it, right?
Correct. Now think about your behavior. If you know that every single bullet you buy is registered to your name with a unique code, are you going to buy a box of ammo and just hand it to your cousin who has a felony record?
Probably not. Because if he uses it in a crime, the police are going to come knocking on my door.
Exactly. It creates a chain of accountability. It makes the original legal purchaser responsible for the projectile. It's designed to make people think twice about illegally trafficking ammunition.
That brings us to the second big concept from this section, suitability. It's a word they use a lot. It sounds like a background check, but the report says it's much more than that.
A standard background check, the NICS system, is essentially a negative search. It's a computer checking a database for disqualifiers. Do you have a felony conviction? Have you been involuntarily committed to a mental institution? Do you have a final restraining order against you? If the answer to all of those is no, you pass. It's a very rigid binary checklist.
So if I'm a generally angry, threatening person who makes violent posts online, but I've never actually been convicted of a felony, I pass the check.
Correct. And that is the gap the Commission wants to close. Suitability is a much broader, more holistic standard. They recommend a screening process for anyone seeking a firearm license that assesses whether this person is, well, suitable to be trusted with that level of responsibility.
This is where it gets very nuanced, right?
Yeah.
Because they're very careful not to say, if you have any mental health diagnosis, you're banned.
Crucially, no. And we will get to the mental health section in more detail shortly, but the report emphasizes again and again that a diagnosis alone shouldn't disqualify someone. The vast majority of people with depression or anxiety are not violent. Suitability is about looking at behavior. Have there been documented threats of violence? Is there a history of violent outbursts that maybe didn't result in a conviction, but are documented in police reports?
So it would give the local police chief or the licensing board more discretion. They could look at a file and say, look, this guy has had the police called to his house 10 times in the last year for domestic disturbances. He's never been arrested, but he is clearly not a suitable person to own a firearm right now.
Exactly. It moves the process from a rigid computerized checklist to a human-led risk assessment.
Speaking of police, the report also had some very specific operational changes for law enforcement that came directly from the lessons of that day. One was about jurisdiction.
Yes, this is a direct lesson from the chaos of a massive multi-agency response. In a mass casualty event, officers from neighboring towns rush to help. You have state troopers, you have local cops from the next town over, maybe even off-duty federal agents who live nearby. But legally, a local police officer's authority to make arrests and use force often stops right at their town line.
So a cop from the next town over shows up at Sandy Hook, and technically, they can't arrest anyone or give lawful orders.
It creates a legal and command ambiguity right in the middle of a crisis. Can they detain a suspect? Can they take command of a scene if they are the highest-ranking officer there? The report recommends giving all sworn police officers statewide jurisdiction during a declared emergency. It just cuts all the red tape so they can focus on stopping the threat.
But then they also warned against something called self-dispatching, which sounds like the exact opposite problem.
It is the opposite problem, but it's equally dangerous. Imagine you are a police officer in a town 20 minutes away from Newtown. You hear, active shooter at an elementary school, come over the statewide radio. What is your first instinct?
Get in your car and drive as fast as you possibly can to help.
It's a heroic instinct. It's understandable.
Yeah.
But if every single officer in the county does that at the same time, what happens to the roads and highways leading to the school?
Oh, complete gridlock.
Total gridlock. You end up with hundreds of patrol cars clogging the streets. Now the ambulances can't get in to treat the wounded, the fire trucks can't get in, the specialized SWAT teams can't get to the scene. The report calls for a strict, unified command structure. You need one person running the show, and officers go where they are told. If you aren't called to the scene, you don't go. Because helping by creating a traffic jam isn't helping at all.
It's about suppressing that individual hero instinct for the sake of the overall system.
Order over chaos. That's the goal.
Okay, so we have the building design, we have the weapons, and the police response. Now we have to touch the third rail, the most difficult part of this tapestry. Section 4, mental and behavioral health.
This is perhaps the most complex and in some ways the most heartbreaking section of the report. The Commission describes the mental health system in America not as a system at all, but as fundamentally fragmented.
Fragmented how? What does that mean in practice?
It means it operates in silos that don't talk to each other. The school system sees one piece of a child's life, their pediatrician sees another piece, the parents see another piece, and the insurance companies sit on top of it all, often dictating the type and duration of care based on financial rules, not on clinical needs. The Commission talks a lot about the need for parity.
Parity, that means equality, right? Treating mental health checks the same way we treat physical health checks.
Right. And think about how different they are now. If your child breaks their leg on the playground, what happens?
You go to the ER, you get an x-ray, they set the bone, you get a cast, maybe some physical therapy later. The insurance company covers it. No one questions it.
Exactly. Now, imagine your child starts showing signs of severe anxiety or oppositional defiant disorder. You might get approved for 6 therapy sessions. After that, The insurance company might say the treatment is no longer medically necessary, or you have to pay thousands of dollars out of pocket. The report argues that until we treat behavioral health with the same urgency, the same level of coverage, and the same lack of bureaucracy as physical health, we will continue to miss the kids who need help the most.
And then there's the stigma. The governor's original charge to the commission had this quote that really stuck with me. He said that our society has destigmatized violence while refusing to destigmatize mental treatment.
It's a powerful and disturbing paradox, isn't it? We see violence everywhere in our movies, our video games, on the nightly news. It's normalized. But admitting that you see a therapist, or that your child needs medication for their brain chemistry, for many families, that is still hidden. That is still seen as a source of shame.
And that shame leads to silence.
And silence is so dangerous here. Stigma prevents people from seeking help early when it is most effective. If you wait until someone is 20 years old and already in a deep crisis, it is so much harder to help them than if you had caught the warning signs at age 10 and gotten them support.
Here's where it gets really interesting and maybe controversial for some, though. The report tackles the idea of identifying these kids before they act. I think we all secretly want a test. We want a minority report style system where we can say, this specific kid is going to be a shooter.
And the commission is very, very clear on this point. That test does not exist. You cannot predict violence. It is statistically too rare an event, and human behavior is too complex. However, and this is a critical distinction, they distinguish between prediction and risk assessment.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the real world difference?
Prediction is a crystal ball. It's saying, this will happen. That's impossible. Risk assessment is like putting together a puzzle. The commission strongly advocates for the creation of multidisciplinary threat assessment teams in every school district.
I like the puzzle analogy. Walk me through how that would work.
Okay, imagine a high school student, let's call him student X, who is really struggling. The math teacher knows that student X has gone from a B student to failing, and he puts his head down on the desk every single day. That's one puzzle piece. The bus driver knows that student X sits alone every day and mutters angrily to himself. That's another piece. The gym coach knows that student X got into a shoving match in the locker room and seemed unusually aggressive and angry. Another piece. And the parents know that student X has stopped sleeping and is spending all night on websites that glorify violence.
So everyone has a piece of the puzzle, a little data point.
Right. But in most school systems today, the math teacher doesn't talk to the bus driver doesn't talk to the coach, and nobody talks to the parents because they are terrified of violating privacy laws like FERPA or HIPAA. Everyone is scared of getting sued.
So everyone holds their one piece, but nobody ever sees the whole picture.
Exactly. Separately, none of those behaviors are giant, flashing red lights. Kids fail math. Kids get in fights. But if you get those people in a room and put all those puzzle pieces on the table together...
You see a kid who is in a deep, deep crisis. You see the full pattern.
You see the pattern. The goal of these threat assessment teams is to create a legal and safe space where those people can share that information, to assemble the puzzle before the violence occurs.
But I have to ask the question, isn't that just profiling? I mean, if I was a weird kid in high school, and I definitely was, I wouldn't want to be on some government list just because I wore black and didn't talk much.
And that is the valid fear. That's the pushback. But the commission is very careful here. The goal of the team isn't to arrest the kid. It's not a get-'em squad. It's a help-'em squad. The primary question they're supposed to ask isn't how do we punish or expel the student? The question is, does the student need help? And how do we mobilize the resources of the school and the community to get it to him?
So it's about intervention and support, not punishment.
Ideally, yes. And it's about catching what experts call leakage.
Leak.
That's the term they use. In the aftermath of almost every mass shooting, we find out the perpetrator leaked their intent beforehand. They told a friend, they posted a manifesto on a forum, they wrote a disturbing essay for English class, they leaked the violence that was building up inside them. The threat assessment team is designed to be the bucket that catches those leaks before the pipe bursts.
But that requires people in the school to be connected enough to even hear the leak in the first place. Which brings us to another key risk factor, social isolation.
Huge. The report identifies social isolation as a massive and often overlooked risk factor. You can't assess a kid you don't know. You can't help a kid who is invisible to the adults in the building.
They proposed this trusted adult rule, which I thought was so simple but so powerful.
Yes. The recommendation is that every single student in a school building should have a meaningful, positive connection with at least one adult in that building.
Just one.
Just one can be enough to anchor a child who is adrift. And it doesn't have to be their favorite teacher. It could be the basketball coach, the librarian, the school nurse, the cafeteria worker, or the custodian we talked about earlier. But there has to be someone the student feels they can talk to, because disconnected, isolated people are at a much higher risk of radicalization, desperation, and ultimately violence.
It's really amazing how it all loops back to human connection. The locks buy you seconds, the glass buys you minutes, but the connection, in theory, can prevent the need for the locks in the first place.
That is the absolute essence of the tapestry metaphor. The hardware is the last line of defense. The software, the human relationships, is the first and most important line.
So let's move to the final section of the report, Section 5, Response, Recovery, and Resilience. Because the report acknowledges that the tragedy doesn't end when the shooter is down and the yellow police tape comes down.
No, that is just the beginning of the next, and in some ways, longest phase. The trauma extends far beyond the immediate families of the victims. It radiates out, it hits the first responders, the surviving children, the teachers who were there, the neighbors who heard the sirens. The report criticizes the standard American approach of just cleaning up and reopening as quickly as possible.
They talk about needing a pre-planned resilience strategy.
Right. Standard disaster response usually focuses on physical reconstruction, rebuilding the walls, fixing the broken glass. This report calls for psychological reconstruction planning. How do you support the long-term mental health of an entire community for 5, 10, 20 years after an event like this?
Because that level of trauma literally rewires a community.
It absolutely does. In communities that have experienced mass violence, we see higher rates of substance abuse, divorce, depression, and anxiety disorders for years, even decades, after the event. The Commission argues you need to have a plan for that before it happens. You need to have the infrastructure for long-term mental health support ready to be deployed.
And that requires the community to buy in. We're right back to that local champion concept again.
Exactly. You cannot mandate a feeling of safety from the state capitol. The governor can sign a law that says schools must be safe, but you can't legislate the feeling of safety and trust. That has to be built, block by block, locally. The report emphasizes that if you pull one thread, if you ignore the mental health needs during the recovery, or if you ignore the design flaws in the buildings, the whole safety net fails. It must be a combined, sustained effort of design, law enforcement, and health.
So we've been through the timeline, the building design, the weapons, the mental health system, and the recovery. It is a massive and very heavy document.
It is. It's a difficult read.
So what does this all mean? If you're a listener, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a teacher, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there is no silver bullet. There is no single law or single lock or single program that fixes this problem. It is a holistic approach, or it is nothing.
The report explicitly addresses the cost of all this, too. Because doing all of this, retrofitting hundreds of schools with laminated glass, hiring and training threat assessment teams, implementing a laser etching system for bullets, it costs a lot of money.
It does. It is very expensive. But the Commission took a very firm and admirable stance on this. They did not censor their recommendations based on cost. Their job was to determine what works, what would be effective. The question of how to pay for it is a separate political question.
And the argument they make is that safety is an investment, not just an expense.
Precisely. Safe, high-quality schools attract families. They attract businesses. If a school district gets a reputation for being safe and supportive, property values go up. The community thrives. But more importantly, what is the cost of the alternative?
You can't put a price on the lives that were lost. But you can also look at the direct cost of the tragedy itself. The lawsuits, the medical bills, the lost productivity from traumatized workers, the sheer human misery. It's incalculable.
Exactly. The cost of prevention is high, but the cost of failure is infinite.
I want to end with a thought that really comes from the report's discussion on situational awareness. You know, we hear that phrase, if you see something, say something, all the time. And it usually makes me think of an unattended bag at the airport. Feels a little paranoid.
Right. It implies suspicion. Watch your neighbor because they might be a threat. But the report sort of reclaims that phrase. It implies connection, not suspicion.
How so?
Well, you can only see something if you are actually looking. And you can only understand what you see if you are connected to the people and the community around you. If you don't know your students, you won't see the subtle change in their behavior that signals a crisis. If you don't know your neighbors, you won't see their deepening isolation. Seeing requires paying attention.
That's the challenge at the heart of it all, isn't it? Are we, as a society, actually looking at each other? Or are we just staring at the locks on the doors, hoping they hold?
That is the fundamental question. The locks are necessary. We need the better glass. We need the smart police tactics. But the looking, the empathy, the connection, the difficult work of imagination that Jeremy Richmond called for at the very beginning, that is what ultimately keeps us safe.
We're going to close today with the dedication from the report itself. It seems like the only appropriate way to end this conversation.
The Sandy Hook Advisory Commission dedicates this report to the 26 victims who were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School, to their families, the Newtown community, and to all those that have come face to face with the devastating effects of violence.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. It was a tough one, but a really important one. Take care of each other.